You want some?
Oh, hi.
Oh, wow, nice. Most of us have read classics like Aragon or The Lord of the Rings, both of which have fantasy world maps in order to place their characters in the world. Maps help visually place characters, give an idea of story scope, make the story's world feel more real, and then also, young writers need to usually make maps. Young authors often don't have an idea themselves of what their world is like, so creating a map themselves helps them create an idea of the world within their head in order to place their story in it. Without a map half the time, clarity for readers also diminishes because people don't have an idea of scope where things and places are. And it's also just fun to have. I've always loved maps and stories and have begun drawing them seriously around 13. For example, this is a map that I drew around 2 years ago. And it's kind of in depth. I could zoom in, but I don't want to. So the biggest question is, what do you need to get started, or the materials needed? Really, you just need a paper and a pencil, but you can also get pens and erasers, such as higher quality pens like micron pens and then thick canvas paper. But usually for examples like this, I'm going to be using a drawing tablet that's connected to a computer and then a larger display. This is my Wacom Intuos. This is around $90 for the entire thing, and it just connects to your computer via Bluetooth, and it acts as a drawing tablet for your computer. The three most important steps to drawing and creating a believable fantasy map are correct geography, environmental causes and effects, and human geopolitics. This brings me to the first part of the process. To begin, we need to obviously have coastlines. So to create a coastline or any landmass in water, you usually need to have a thick starting line to distinguish the two. So usually this can just be whatever you think you want it to be. You can squiggle, you can make smaller, broader shapes, or you can make thicker shapes. These all determine the kind of landmass that your world will be. Just have whatever you have in your head and then translate it onto the map. So right now I'm just thinking you can make a peninsula, you can make a large, just flat landmass, you can do whatever. It's all up to your imagination. Now that we have that done, we can also consider plate tectonics. Although they play it's not necessarily needed, but it helps place mountains where you need them in the future in the process. You can also begin to create a geological history within your mind for your landmass, how they moved in the past and how they'll move in the future. That can determine where islands are, where islands have split off, where islands merge, whatever. For example, plate tectonics in the real world have created the Andes Mountains and the Himalaya Mountains. I'll pull up a visual here. These are the larger plate tectonics in the world. They've created huge mountain ranges like the Himalayas. Right over here are the Andes, which are also some of the largest mountains in the world. And so using that kind of knowledge, you can put it into your fantasy map. Secondly is mountain placement. Mountains determine a lot in a world, such as where rivers are, where water begins, all that kind of stuff, which future determines where life and plants grow. So, for example, using a smaller brush stroke in order to better visually identify coasts and space them out, we can create mountains just as little triangles. They don't have to be crazy. And using any future plate knowledge in your head for a history, you can make a little chain, or you can make a cluster. Doesn't really matter. We can put some down here too, because why not? To make it more 3D, always have a mountain ridge line down. These are pretty straight because my Bluetooth has a connection error, but preferably you can make it more rough. Give it a more realistic feel. To add on to this, we can have a smaller brush stroke and give it some shading, make it even more three-dimensional. That's just an example of what you can do, but I'm not going to do it for all of them because I don't have enough time. For hills, you can also do the same thing, but less tall mountains. Hills can determine smaller fault lines. Older past mountains, such as the Appalachians, are a lot less higher in altitude than something like the Andes. But above all, consider fantasy, because in fantasy worlds or fictional worlds, you can have fictional reasons for your land masses. For example, in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, its landmass is completely created by magic, which has straight, not natural mountain ranges. So nothing has to be scientific, but it's more realistic to consider it half the time. Next is river placement. You have to remember for rivers that rivers show the lowest topographical part in a region because rivers and water takes the path of least resistance. So a lot of the time we can just think of rivers as winding, but the terrain around rivers also determines the shape of a river. If it's a sharper, rockier terrain, a river will mostly be straight, but if it's full of sediment and dirt, it'll be windy and go back and forth, something like the Mississippi. A good thing to remember about rivers too is that they never split off towards the ocean. They always split going towards the mountains because they have multiple sources. So let's say this is one of the biggest rivers that has multiple tributaries and multiple sources, but then we can also make a smaller river starting from the mountains up here and have it like that. Sometimes you can also make them deltas though, so there's a few exceptions to the rule of them splitting off. Something like the Nile has a lot of splits in its river. Are you zooming in and out? Wow. Now, because you have the most basic topographical part of your world, geographically as well, you can breathe some life into it with trees, plants, whatever. The water that you created determines those. So for example, we're gonna go to a smaller brush stroke and we're gonna make some trees. Some important factors to consider are things like the rain shadow effect, which is how a collection of moisture is usually blocked by mountains. Because of that, forests are usually only on one side of mountains, or at least one side of the mountains is usually drier. A really good example of this are the mountains in Iran, which I have right here. There is a jungle on the other side of this mountain range in Iran, and the rest of it is a very arid, very hot desert. But moisture from across the Caspian Sea makes the other side of this mountain range less jungle. You can translate that into your future map. So for example, this side of the mountains over here, that could be arid, but over here could be full of little trees. So we can just make trees by like making them little triangles, anything like that. Now on a larger scale, it'll give a much better idea of forests for your map, but you can also do different styles for forests too. You can make it like a mass, and you can add little trunks to this mass, and those will act as treetops. And to give it more 3 dimensions, you can add trunks right here. It's all very up to style. Of course, it'd be better on paper, or if my thing wasn't messing around again. Another important thing to remember is that latitude affects temperature of an area. For example, the Sahara Desert is a lot more hot than something like the Gobi Desert, which is higher in latitude in the real world. Last but not least is the implementation of people. We need settlements in this world, obviously. So cities or towns, anything of the sort. You can represent those with just a dot half the time, but you don't always need to do that. Now you have to remember that people settle around water. and people need water to survive. Or people settle around economic regions. So for example, say this area in the mountains had a gold mine. People are going to settle there. That could be a sign for a city. I don't think it's going to let me do that. Or you could put it on the coast because people need fresh water, and water usually attracts trade and is a lot easier to transport goods and things like that. So really you have to consider economic, like why people live there. That's an important thing, and how easy it is to live there. For example, this place could have a lot of rivers, but maybe the wildlife is hostile, so people haven't even tried to live there because it's just so dangerous. You can make this all up in your head, which is the most important part of the entire process, but thinking about things like that helps it be a lot more realistic. Another thing to consider is human conflict. For example, people don't like each other because of whatever reasons. And so, say we have a nation state right here, bordered by rivers are usually borders, and we have another one down here. Sometimes towns and settlements are only put places as a place to be a fort or like place of fortification in order to protect this country from this country. So you have to think about political examples, historical examples, anything like that. In summary, I would like to recap my 3 main points. Fantasy maps require several things in order to be believable. Correct geography, good environment and climate, and human geopolitics. I hope in this speech I was able to draw a picture of how anyone might be able to create their own fantasy map. Thank you for listening, and good luck on your potential future mapping journey.